In high seas or calm, both opportunity and risk lurk just below the surface. Answers require in-depth analysis. Welcome to BlackFin Group's Shark Cage podcast, where experts dip below the surface of important industry issues in search of hidden opportunities.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Shark Cage from BlackFin Group. Very excited to be back again. And we have a special guest, another partner from BlackFin Group is Andrew Weiss. Andrew mentioned there's a couple of things that he wanted to chat about. And I will tell you this, is that when Andrew talks, I have a tendency to listen. So Andrew, welcome in, and I'm very excited to have you here.
Thank you, Michael. I'm very, very happy to be here. Should be an interesting conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before we get started, for those in the audience who may not be familiar with your background, can you tell a little bit about your experience?
So I started my professional career as a consultant for a high-end technology strategy company, and then went from there to Fannie Mae, was one of our clients. I used to tease it was the consultant's nightmare. Now I have to implement my own recommendations, and the first major thing that I brought to market was Desktop Underwriter. So that gives you a sense of my age and tenure, if nothing else. And I've gone on from there to do a wide variety of things in the mortgage industry. I was CIO of a significant independent mortgage bank. I have worked in other consulting firms and most recently, obviously, BlackFin. I also had my own software company in the mortgage space. So I like to say I've been able to sit on all three sides of the table. I have been a vendor of technology, I've been a consumer of technology, and I've been a consultant advising people about technology. So I have that sort of complete 360-degree view of our industry through the lens of technology and what works and doesn't work.
Yeah, that's excellent. And that's, again, why you bring so much value to BlackFin Group. One of the things that we talk about a lot in our partner calls is the concept of this, climate, so much uncertainty going on out there. And I know you want to talk a little bit about maybe strategic technology investment at this time and give your thoughts on that, if you don't mind.
So I want to start with the usual caveat, which is everyone is different. And I think it's funny because in the mortgage industry, we all do the same thing, but we all do it very differently. And so the first thing to say is that, look at yourself and make sure that you're making decisions that are really relevant to the kind of company that you want to be. There is no one size fits all. And I think that when you listen to vendors and frequently when you listen to consultants, you do get there's only one right answer to any question. And I think that's absolutely not true. The other thing I would say is that there is so much technology in the mortgage industry, but it is highly fragmented. There are lots of pieces and parts, and everyone knows it takes a village to make a mortgage. But you got to use 6, 8, 10 different pieces of technology to make that happen. And so what you end up with is a scenario where it isn't so much the technology that matters. It's how you use that technology. And I think that there are a lot of lenders out there who are constantly being sold by technology vendors. Oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. It'll save you $1 million, blah, blah, blah. And they're not seeing those same results after they make the purchase. And the reason that they're not seeing them is less probably about the quality of the technology than it is about the way they're using that technology. Have they incorporated that technology into a new process, into a new way to manufacture the loan to take advantage? The other thing I'll say is that they tend to apply it like peanut butter, spread it the same way across everything. And in fact, that's not necessarily the right way. You're going to handle a really simple, 60 LTV refi kind of loan should be very different from the way you're doing a purchase at a 45% DTI where that, you're right up against the edge of the different underwriting standards and you want to know more about that borrower. So how do you make sure that you can sort of plug in and plug out the different technologies to use them appropriately and make sure you're only paying for the ones you actually use.
No, that's fantastic. And you make me think about something. Your first part, you talked a little bit what I would call user interface with the technology in question. The second part, talking about how you customize the technology, the software itself, to meet the process. Let's go back to the former. We always talk about how we have defects in the sense that users become non-compliant as it relates to the way they're using the system. How do we mandate as outsourcers, as somebody who's consulting to maybe bring in and implement a technology, how do you make sure that users comply with the most effective way the technology is being utilized?
Well, it's one of the hardest things that exists, and it certainly is challenging, particularly for a group that has done it one way for a long period of time, right? And every individual can decide how long is long. I'm working with a client now where they've basically been doing it the same way for in the neighborhood of 20 years. And that change management process is super duper difficult. And again, they're bringing in new technology. It's going to be very different for them. How to take advantage of that is really dependent on their ability to make that change. And I think there's a couple of different ways that you actually affect that change. One is the process by which you implement. So by doing it in a small group and sort of prototyping it and getting the people in the room who are the respected individuals in the organization to say, wow, if we did this differently, we could be X amount better. I could do more loans. I could do different loans. I could do whatever. It depends on the goals of the organization. But some of us are old enough to remember an old ad campaign for some cereal brand. I've forgotten the brand, mind you, where if Mikey likes it, then I'll like it too. And I think getting those Mikeys into the room as the process of implementing that technology helps. I think also it really requires some management discipline. Frequently, management isn't as focused on the process as they should be. They're focused on the results. And it's not about any particular individual. It's about really the knowledge of how that works and being able to have the time and energy to go down there and do that. Excuse me. And being able, being able to go down there and really understand who's using it well, who's not. And it's probably not senior management. It's probably really more that middle management. So you have to bring them on board. You have to give them the right tools to be able to evaluate whether it's working or not. Two other pieces I'll quickly mention. One is it's great if there's some numbers, some metrics behind whatever the change is intended to be to know if you're getting there. If you can't measure it, it's hard to manage it. That's a very old axiom. So putting in some of those measurements really helps. And then lastly, there is a certain sort of less formal manner of celebrating the success of the people who are doing it right and bringing the organization along by that sort of positive reinforcement. So if you're measuring it and you can see the people who aren't doing it right or are, and celebrating the people who are, that's a great way to get the organization to change. It's a very challenging thing though, and every organization has its own dynamics and its own sense of it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. One of the things we've talked about on the podcast in the past is really how important championing the process or change management by senior leadership and how important that is to make sure that the buy-in from the entire organization is there. But the other is making sure that you have your correct processes in step. And I would be remiss as a black belt for Six Sigma is not talking about control mechanisms when you implement different types of change management to make sure that you're in compliance. And that leads kind of to another question, talking about AI. As a tech guy, I cannot not talk to you about AI and what it means and where there's value add potentially in, the origination through servicing platforms that we utilize every day. What are your thoughts?
Well, I want to start with a personal perspective, which is I was born and bred in New York City, and so I'm genetically cynical. As an industry, we have gone through wave after wave after wave of 2, 3, 4-letter acronyms that were going to change the world and save everything and somehow drive down the cost to manufacture a loan to almost zero, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, as we all know, it keeps going up and up and up, because we haven't really changed very much. So that's my basic starting point when I look at AI. I think the answer with AI is there's some things it does well, and a lot of stuff it doesn't do very well at all. And so it's about calling your shots, making sure that you're only using it where it's appropriate, not just for the task, but for your organization and the task. What you don't want AI doing is recommending loan programs, because first of all, that's illegal, right? I mean, you'll be way out of any regulation compliance based on that. Second of all, it's going to look, AI by definition, the AI that we're calling AI today, looks backwards at all the loans that have been originated and only originates those kinds of loans. And that may or may not work for any given individual. Every individual is different. Every borrower has a different set of circumstances. So you need to be very careful with that. On the other hand, using some of the natural language things to improve your customer service, to facilitate communication with the prospect or the borrower, that is an appropriate use, as long as the lender is very conscious of training the AI on data that they can control and are aware of, right? Everyone has talked about these AI hallucinations, and they're real. And if you're not careful about the data that you give to train the AI, that's when you get those hallucinations. And as a lender, you don't want to be responsible for your AI saying something it really shouldn't have. And the way that you know that it won't is by focusing on the data you use to train and curate your AI. And some of that's through the vendor, right? It's not all on you necessarily, but it's something you want to talk to the vendor about and understand how they've done it, and understand. And if they don't get that question, then you want to walk away with your hair on fire. The other thing I would say is, in going back to your initial opening to this, we are in a current market of great uncertainty. So I think dabbling in AI makes some sense, sort of dipping your toe in, seeing where it might be useful to an organization, totally makes some sense. But going sort of wholesale investment in it is very risky, and you really want to make sure all your ducks are in a row, because who knows what's going to happen in not too long. I think, there's a whole strategy around technology investments in general and how you line them up against the risk you're willing to take in your organization. And I think you want to view AI through exactly the same filter. It's just another technology investment. Yes, it has some beautiful things, document recognition and data harvesting off documents, a great use for AI, as they call it. Of course, it's been around for a long time in terms of optical character recognition. It's just better and better and better. A wonderful use, maybe worth the money, depending on your loan manufacturing process and whether it's going to be that much cheaper. So those are some examples where you really got to dig in and understand the organization's risk tolerance against the potential to get the benefits.
No, great insight. What it speaks to me as far as AI, coming from a default servicing background myself, it speaks to immediately in terms of compliance, borrower interaction, loss mitigation, all the default activities, make sure you're in compliance with CFPB, that sort of thing. Where do you see from maybe document review to any type of the steps in the process for origination, that AI can come in from a compliance perspective?
Well, it's interesting. I think that AI can be useful for digging the data out to see whether you are in fact in compliant or not. I think that AI to evaluate whether that process is compliant is a pretty risky thing. One of the things that I've said going back to my early days with DU is that these things they're not things you infer, they're absolute rules, right? Did you do it right? Yes or no? Now, everyone knows that half of the regulations out there are subject to interpretation. But for your organization, you're going to want to interpret it one way and be consistent with that interpretation. AI doesn't really work that way. There's too much gray area based on what data you feed it and so on. So I think that the value for AI in compliance is about dealing with documents and getting the data out of things that might be more difficult to do without that technology, as opposed to then what do you do with that data once you get it out? Are you in compliance or not? I think AI is not yet at that point. Will it be ever? I don't know. I'm not sure, but it's going to, the pace at which our industry moves, it's going to be a long time.
That's good stuff. As we wind down, I'm going to turn on you a bit and ask you a little bit about yourself. I'd like to know, as a consultant, what you enjoy about this. What do you enjoy about consulting with groups? Get in, dig deep, help people with change management, improve their processes, be more compliant, and have better outcomes. What turns you on about it?
Well, I think, honestly, it's working with the clients. I mean, the clients I've met, some are anxious to change, some less so. But I think that, working with those individuals and getting through that change process. I mean, it's funny. I'm the partner of the technology practice, and we've talked very little about the technology. We've talked all about the people and the process and change management. I think that's very valuable, and that's the stuff that's kind of fun and intriguing. It's also the stuff that's always different, right?
Right.
Yes, it is true. Technology changes. It changes pretty quickly. Our willingness to take on new technologies in the mortgage industry is kind of low. So that's not the thing that's really gonna drive a lot of interest. What is interesting is seeing how people can take advantage of these technologies, and that's the thing that sort of turns me on. But it's all about working with the clients. If I just sat in a room and wrote papers or something like that, I'd go out of my mind in no time at all.
I get asked all the time, so what makes BlackFin different? And in a couple of sentences, what makes us a BlackFin different compared to other consulting companies?
Well, I think what makes us different is three things. One, my partners and I all have this kind of background and experience. We've seen it all before. We know what to do. We know how to challenge ourselves to figure out the specific answer for this client, not the generic answer for everyone. I think that's one. I think the other one is because of the relative seniority of the teams, we can work in a really fast and efficient way. We don't need $1 gazillion and a 22-month contract or whatever to help solve a problem. We can get in, we can get out if that's all that's needed, because we bring this sort of senior informed leadership, but yet very lender, customer focused, lender servicer, whoever it may be.
Right. Agreed.
I think that the third aspect is very much that throughout, we are so focused on our customer success. We would rather bill less and have the customer be successful. And I think that's not necessarily true of every consulting firm out there. So that's why I think BlackFin is successful. I think, again, we're not necessarily going to fit every customer. We can't bring in the hordes of hundreds of junior people fresh out of MBA school to do something. That's not our shtick. Our shtick is senior people, industry experience, coming in, focusing on an issue and solving that problem.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I appreciate it. Andrew, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope the audience had gleaned some really good stuff from your conversation. I'm assuming they will, as I always do. Thanks again. And everybody, I appreciate your time today, and we'll all see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in the Shark Cage. To be a guest on a future episode, send an email to info@blackfin-group.com. To find out more about the show or the information provided in this episode, visit BlackFin Group online at www.blackfin-group.com.